And before we begin, I'd like to ask each of you just briefly to give us a little bit of background on each of your companies, number of power units, and the markets that you serve. We'll start with you, Steve.
Well, I work for Miller Transporters. We have 400 tractors right now. We have over 1,000 stainless steel trailers. We serve the bulk chemical industry. Our customers are the Dows, DuPonts, BASFs of the world. And we operate 19 terminals throughout the United States. Most of them, or all of them, are located from Houston, up St. Louis, Chicago, and then eastward. That's really where the U.S. chemical market originates. We go 48 states in Canada, and we generate somewhere in the neighborhood of about $100 million in revenue.
Gary?
Pendulum Shift Consulting has one power unit. That's me. I'm the janitor, IT, and everything else. I named my company Pendulum Shift Consulting because in life or in business, things tend to shift to the left or right. And what I try to do is take my 30 years of experience and help facilitate either shippers or carriers bringing it back to where they'd like it to be.
Brett?
Nussbaum is 200 power units and about 450 trailers. We serve both dedicated carriage. It's about 40% of our business. The other 60% is irregular route, operating on a regional and on a national basis, primarily all dry van. Our customers are made up primarily of industrial shippers that are based in the Midwest. And we're based in actually in Normal, Illinois, which is right center of Illinois between Chicago and St. Louis.
Very good. Gary, I think the name Pendulum Shift is fantastic, and that's exactly what we've seen. Since 2008, shippers really have had the upper hand in the negotiation process up until probably the beginning of 2011. We saw things return to carriers' favor. But profit margins remain thin thanks to higher equipment costs, increased driver pay, and of course, as we've seen in the past several months, a return to higher diesel prices. What are some of the lessons that you guys have learned since the turnaround?
Well, for me, the fact that we really have to concentrate on making ourselves as a trucking company more efficient. And then, of course, and it started back in 2004 with the hours of service, is to improve the utilization, we also have to make sure our business is driver-centric and consider the drivers first, because the engines, the trucks, nothing moves itself. We have to have the drivers, and we are so centric on those drivers. If we're not, it's a people business. It's not just trucks. We're in the people business.
And you said you're a 75% contractor, correct?
That's correct.
Brent, real quick.
Yeah, things that we've learned, we had to be customer focused, and we've always been customer focused, but we said, if people are going to use 2009 as a basis to go back and try to get rate decreases at a time when they were struggling, that we had to make sure that our relationships with our customers were solid. So we've worked really, really hard on that. We had done that before, but the other part of it was very much along the lines of what Stephen said. We had to know our costs. We had to educate our customers about our costs, and that's been probably the biggest two things that we have done to try and improve things and lessons that we've learned since 2009.
Gary, what have you seen from the kind of the catbird seat between the two sides as far as the way things have changed since the upturn?
Well, to a certain extent, I'm just not sure if things actually have changed. I think in some ways, I'm an advocate for carriers to make a profit. I think that's critical. That's how you have your scorecard. That's how you rate yourself. But when we look at what's going to change in the economy and that, you're now in a position of leverage. And you can either decide to think about leverage in the way of increasing your rates, or you can think of leverage of how you improve your supply chain. And so I have more of a passion for improving the supply chain when you have leverage than using leverage just to increase your rates. And so I think this is a real challenge for the carrier community, is this is the time that, yes, you probably will raise your rates, but it's even more important, it's an opportunity for you to really improve your supply chain.
Okay, very good. Perhaps the most contentious point that remains with carriers and shippers in negotiating rates is the need for fuel reimbursement. So we'll start with this. Gary, I know you've seen both sides of the equation and have some thoughts that you'd like to share on how shippers and carriers can come together to work on a system that really is fair for both parties.
Well, one of my service offerings is I help shippers and carriers get together and talk about fair reimbursement of fuel. And based on my experience, shippers do not trust carriers, carriers do not trust shippers on fuel reimbursement. And the problem is they don't spend enough quality time talking about it. They don't break down what is fundamentally wrong with the fuel surcharge. He's trying to negotiate rates and try to generate profits out of fuel. And what you should do as a carrier is, I want to be reimbursed for all the gallons that I consumed on behalf of the shipper. And so one of the things that I work on is the DOE has fundamental flaws. You're going to eventually go to lane-specific daily reset, and it's how you decide to get that journey to go from a DOE mentality to a lane-specific daily reset mentality on fuel reimbursement.
Okay. Stephen and Brent, I know you guys have had some experiences with fuel reimbursement in your negotiations. Can you share some insight?
Well, excuse me. I was approached in late 2011 with a customer who wanted to do the daily fuel reimbursement, and it's not something we embrace readily because we're all entrenched in the DOE and how that process has worked, and it's worked fine for us for many years. Of course, there are flaws in it that I see, and there's a lot of negotiations that go back and forth between my company and my customers. Local fuel surcharge is not fair to the shipper community when I'm doing a percentage. It's unfair to me if they're doing a mileage percentage reimbursement, and there are a lot of heated negotiations that'll take place. But I like what you have told me about how its fuel surcharge, when it first started, has gone from a quarterly change and update to a monthly change and update to now most of us are on a weekly update, and at some point daily.
Yeah. In ours, about 98% are all on a weekly. We've got one, maybe two that are on a monthly. We don't like it, but we've priced our freight accordingly. You know, the one thing that we've struggled with is, as we talk to our shippers, we find out the shippers don't even understand fuel. So if they don't understand fuel, then how in the world do we even explain it to them? So we got to the point the last couple of years where we've sent our CFO out on a sales call. Actually, we have our CFO involved in sales in a lot of in his role, and he's been able to sit down to them with them and say, you know, look, you need to understand these are the parameters that go into figuring fuel, and you need to understand this because part of the problem is the guy that you're talking to has got to explain it to the guy, to all the people in the corporate office. If he doesn't or she doesn't understand that, how in the world do we ever get the CEOs, the CFOs of those companies to understand that fuel is something we need to be reimbursed from? It's a cost of doing business. So. We've just, again, it always goes back to education. But if you take your C-level or your accountants and if they understand it, it can go in and explain it to the shippers, you get far more buy-in and you deepen the relationship because now you're not just out there charging them something, you're out there helping to educate them as to why you're charging it.
And you've seen good results from that?
Very good results. Our CFO was a little unnerved one time, walked into a meeting here a couple months ago in Kansas City, and they brought in all the C-level people, and he said, here I am, there's 7 or 8 of those people, and he said, here I am at the other end of the table. And he said, they beat up on me for a little while, and then he said, I finally got them to understand what we were dealing with, all the costs that go into it, and why, not just our company, but every other company needs to charge fuel, and how often it should be, how often it changes, and the impact that it has on us. And he said after that, he said, I walked out, he said, I think I've made believers out of them. But typically we don't, as an industry, do a real good job of explaining that because our people don't always understand it real well.
Gary?
Well, I mean, I agree exactly. The whole education part, raising the fuel competency, I spend sometimes 4 to 6 hours when a shipper asks me to work with their core carriers. And the first hour or 2 hours are always a period of time where you have Democrats and Republicans in the room.
Yeah.
And they always think you're trying to do something. Once they realize what you're really trying to do is create an environment that you are reimbursed exactly for what you purchased. And the only way you can really get there is lane-specific daily reset, because everything else is just confusing the bid process. And sometimes you lose business because another carrier does not know how to price fuel. And my belief is no carrier knows how to price fuel. Some do it better than others, but every month you have a month that you lose money because of the fuel surcharge, and then 3 months later you make money because of the fuel surcharge, and it had nothing to do with what you were doing. It had only thing to do with your fuel surcharge agreement.
Brent, back to you, kind of along the same lines of having your CEO or your CFO go along on sales calls. You mentioned in our conference call the need for carriers to provide more transparency and visibility on a lane-by-lane basis when setting rates. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. We, most everybody that does any kind of dedicated, it's easy to build a costing model for a dedicated operation because you know everything that goes into it. But when you're working with irregular route lanes, you oftentimes find that whatever you're pricing is just one piece of everything else that you're doing. And we recognize that for a long time, and we've always been frustrated with irregular route dry van freight. And a few years ago, somebody came in, did a demo on a yield management software, and our IT people sat through that and said, you know, we can build that. We don't need to go out and buy that. So they set in motion about a year's period of time, and we started looking at everything that goes involved in that lane, the rates, the accessorials, the detention time, the drop trailers, the deadhead to that load, the deadhead after that load, every bit of information that goes into that. And our tool would assign that piece of business a yield based on how it fit in with everything else that we were doing. And it allowed us to go back to a shipper and say, you know, our yield this month was X on that piece of business, and we need to, maybe it's a load going from Chicago to Rapid City, South Dakota, or something like that. And it was just not carrying its share of the weight. And it allowed us to go in and show them, give them all the criteria on every one of their lanes, and instead of going in every year and saying we need a 3% or a 5% rate increase, we'd go in and say, you know what, these are the lanes that are underperforming, because we know if we price everything at maybe a 5% or whatever it is, we may end up losing a piece of business that we ordinarily would really want to keep that's already really profitable to us. So we started attacking the underperforming lanes and just started raising our yields every month. The shippers love it because now, you know, instead of just coming in and saying, well, we need a rate increase, and you know, it's you know, driver wages or whatever it is, you know, we can show them, you know, in our software, show them the data that this piece of business isn't operating well. Maybe it's a piece that they need to find another carrier for. So we've raised rates by attacking lanes rather than whole customers, and they really appreciated that.
You know, we saw the latest FTR truck loadings index for April had the truck loadings at 94%, which was the biggest year-over-year jump of 2.97%, biggest jump since June of last year. So certainly, capacity is extremely tight, and obviously that allows some flexibility when carriers are choosing which shippers to go with. How do you go about the process of selecting shippers now than you would have during the recession, when it was kind of a take all you can mentality?
Well, we do look for those shippers who are going to be carrier friendly, who's going to help us to attract drivers. We're looking for optimum utilization as well as good rates. But the main thing is to have shippers who understand the seat we're in now. We're all faced with a shortage of drivers. They're not easy to come by. We have 400 units with my company, and we'd like to have 425, 430. But I can't even get there with all the recruiting efforts that we do. And we need those shippers who are going to help us, at least by having us give the home time our drivers need, routes that they like, and the pay that's going to support their families. And so we have a scorecard that we rate that. We rate lanes just the way that that you do, Brent, and look at what's best for us. And if we're a single source carrier for that shipper, you know, we have to let them make that tough decision if we've got to raise that rate so much.
And do you find there's more willingness on the shipper's part to meet those needs that you have now in order to be able to serve them, or is it still somewhat just a price-sensitive issue with you guys?
I think it's both. It's still price-sensitive with a lot of the shippers, but also I think we have been talking about the driver shortage for so long and the need to improve utilization that many shippers are coming around, and they are doing things to help us to be more efficient. They're not spending a lot of extra money to do that because they can't afford to. We're all operating on a minimum amount of profit. So but they are cognizant of what we're doing. And I feel like that in today's environment, with the fact that the truck loadings are up, that we're able to communicate better. At least those shippers are willing to listen to us now, whereas in the past, 2005, 2006, when it was very busy for all of us, and we had an extreme capacity crunch then, that was like the first wave. And now this second wave, I think they're a lot more open to listening to us.
Gary, with the carrier customers that you have, do you see similar situations with working with shippers?
Well, I think you've probably got two types of shippers. And there's a lot of shippers out there, at least I believe, that understood the pain you went through during the downturn and did not take advantage of it. You also have a set of shippers who are now seeing a different world and saying, I think I have to be a partner now. And I think you need to step back and kind of assess which types of customers you have, because there's going to be another downturn. I mean, you got to leverage now. There's going to be another downturn that's going to impact you. So what kind of relationships are you building with the ones that stick with you during the good times and the bad times? And so I think that's critical. I think what Brent said, he talked about metrics, he talked about being fact-based when he went to his customer, and he talked about improving the supply chain. And if you kind of sit back and reflect on your current customers and you don't have any improvements to your supply chain that you take to them on a monthly, quarterly basis, then you're not building a relationship. And so that's kind of your challenge from my vantage point is, are you really trying to improve the supply chain, or are you just trying to improve June results? So that's how I see it right now.
Brent, any thoughts on it?
You know, as we look at our customers, we want to grow with the customers that we have. And I find that there's a lot of salespeople who are out there always looking for the next kill. So they're out there looking for, the next great account instead of building on the great one that you have now. We have spent more time growing with existing customers the last couple of years than ever before. And it's because we've gone back and explained to them the value that we bring to them. It's because we've talked to them about our CSA scores. It's because we have provided solutions and helped them to recognize that they don't need to go out and find another carrier. All they need to do is partner in a greater way with the one they already have. So there are issues that we need to address. we need to have return on investment before we go out and grow. I heard that at a couple other conferences earlier this spring, and it just, you know, it hit home with me again that it's foolish for us to go out and buy a bunch more equipment and put it on the road if what we're already hauling is not providing our stockholders with the return on investment that they should be getting. The other thing you need to be looking at too is, you know, banks are still a little bit fidgety about providing financing to this industry. They need to be able to see that your financials are looking good. They need to have a good feeling about that before they go loan you more money. And you need to educate your customers about that. The investment on equipment is up, what, 40% in the last few years. Driver pay has to go up. Our company gave increases last year. We're in the process of doing it again right now, and we don't really need to, but we feel like well, I shouldn't say we shouldn't feel like we need to. We feel like we need to. We have low turnover, but at the same time, we're looking at it in the sense of we want to attract drivers to us. We don't want to have to go look for them. So these are all things that you need to do to, you know, again, to explain to the customer that before we grow, we need to grow smartly, and they need to understand the value, and that value is not just in people and relationships, but it's also in the investment that we make in drivers and equipment.
And Brett, you mentioned CSA, and it's something that everybody in this room has been dealing with for at least the last 2 years since it went live in December of 2010. But shippers have seemed to be slow to wrap their heads around the importance of carrier selection using CSA. And I'd like to know some of the experience. This is really a question for Brent and Steve as carriers. What are some of have you seen any shippers really come to you because of your CSA scores? Or more importantly, how do you market yourself to shippers by virtue of your CSA?
Well, most of our contracts are still based on, have the wording safe stat in them. And I believe that's because the shipper community has yet to fully understand CSA enough to where they can make a good judgment as to what carriers to choose. It's either satisfactory or unsatisfactory, and we are out there talking to our customers, giving them the public information, letting them see our safe stat scores. I know there's a company that they put it on their tagline of their signature of all their emails. Click here to go to my CSA score, and I think that's a great idea. We don't do that, at least yet, but we have, as a company, we deal with in hazardous materials and have to have safety in the forefront of everything that we do. You know, we were embracing CSA, and we like the fact that it's leveling the playing field for us. But it's the same with all our competitors that I'm up against with that shipping community. So I think a lot of the shippers just, they know it's there, but they don't have the full knowledge of it, and they're kind of comfortable where they are right now. But I guess this is that learning process.
Okay, Brent, have you seen anything differently?
Not really. It's interesting that nobody really even asks about CSA, except for the larger shippers do. The smaller shippers, it's almost like they don't even know what it is. And so we've tried to educate them in meetings, but at the same time, we do monthly e-blasts to our customers, so we keep them informed about what our safety scores are, whether there's any what we're doing new in safety. And I can't tell you that every one of them are opening every e-blast we sent to them every month, but we're getting it out there in that way. But generally, they don't ask, and we have to make the effort to tell them what's going on, in order for them to say anything about it. I think a few of them are concerned about it in relation to driver recruiting, driver retention. So what's this happening? Is if this is driving drivers out, what's it really doing to you? they're looking at it in the way of, how are you doing attracting and keeping drivers? Should I be concerned about lack of capacity because CSA is driving, those people out? And we'd tell them it's in our respect. CSA has done a good thing to drive the worst drivers out, to get them out, to get them improved. But at the same time, it's helped improve the quality of the services that is being provided to them.
And we heard yesterday in some of the discussion, particularly with Administrator Farrow, shippers can have a direct impact on carriers, especially in terms of hours of service, when we get into detention times. And how can carriers educate shippers on the need for more flexibility in delivery schedules and those types of things to avoid those issues that can come around and bite carriers with some violations in CSA?
Well, that's part of our vetting process with our customers. If I'm going to experience so much detention time that my drivers are running out of hours, unable to finish an assigned lane, then I have to take a look at that particular lane. I have to take a look at that shipper and his process, and we go through with our shippers and make that evaluation with them and explain about the hours of service so that they understand, in order for us to be getting the best utilization for our and for them to get the best value from us. We work in different ways to mitigate detention time, offering up, if they've got enough volume, we'll drop trailers, and if they have a yard mule to move it around, and they can preload the trailer for us, those types of things where, we've put people in plants to do that just exclusively in order to let the over-the-road driver use all his driving hours in the most efficient manner. But all that has to come together with the shipper and the education process about hours of service.
And Gary, putting on your Schneider hat and your some of your other experiences, what have you seen in terms of carriers and shippers, or carriers, working with shippers now on reducing detention times?
Well, first thing is detention just didn't happen a couple years ago. So detention's been around a long time. And I think because carriers and shippers, when they have leverage, don't talk about it and don't come to some type of resolution on how do you improve it. So, but I also think there's a lot of great examples where shippers and carriers have gotten together and said, we know we have a capacity problem. We also have a cost structure issue. We have a service issue. So it's whether the shipper drives it or the carrier drives it. One of the parties has to take the lead and say, look, these are my recommendations on how we're going to reduce detention. And so it's how much do you just talk about it, or do you have a plan? If you're just talking about it, it's just like fuel surcharge. It's a 15-minute conversation, and 3 more months you're going to talk about it again. I mean, do you actually have a plan that you can implement? And there's a lot of shippers and carriers that have done that.
And Brent, you've got some insight to share with a project that you just completed, I guess late last year, working with one of your customers to kind of really improve that turnaround time at their facilities. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences with Electrolux?
Sure. Back in 2008, Electrolux, a large appliance manufacturer here in the U.S., and one of our customers came to us and was struggling with a problem that they had. They were struggling to find enough capacity, and the pricing was all over the board with inbound steel coils moved on flatbeds into their plants. And one of the challenges that they had in addition to that is even though the coils were tarped, they were struggling with moisture damage on inbound shipments. Once the flatbeds got to the plants, they got unloaded. There was nothing for them to haul back out. They had to deadhead van trailers in to pick up the finished product to haul back out. So we listened to them and proposed the idea of a van type trailer with a heavy duty floor rating that would be able to permit a 20,000 pound forklift and up to a 15,000 pound coil of steel that would be tied down to the floor to move that product inbound. It would eliminate their moisture problems. At the same time, it would give them a trailer, a van-type trailer by which to load outbound finished product on, and they loved the idea. We approached Wabash Trailer back in, well, shortly after that, and it began a year of development, testing, and on a what they call today their HD 35 trailer. It's got a 35,000 pound floor rating. Again, it'll allow a 20,000 pound forklift and up to a 15,000 pound coil to be moved in on the floor of that trailer. Once it gets to their plants, they offload it, they go around the other side, they pick up a load of finished product and haul it back to one of their distribution centers. In this case, it was, in a few cases, it have been nearby their plant suppliers or their steel suppliers. And again, it's allowed them, they've completely eliminated their moisture issues. They've got consistent pricing for both inbound and outbound now. They don't have this up and down swing of the flatbed pricing and capacity, and it kind of took two modes of transportation and turned it into one. So it was a great project. We had a blast doing it, and they love it. Well, we're using it in different plants of Electrolux's at present.
And how many trailers are you currently using in that operation?
Well, we've got one of the challenges that Electrolux had is being as they handle these 15,000 pound coils. Most of their steel suppliers and their own docks were set up for overhead cranes to unload this. So they sat down and they determined right now that they've just got two plants. They're bringing another facility on in 2013 that they're going to be able to physically unload with a forklift, a heavy-duty forklift. So right now we're only operating about 30 trailers within these operations. One is to a plant in Minnesota, and the other one is to down to Mexico. And they want to bring more in, but they've had a problem, being as it's a little bit slow. They had a problem going up and getting the funds necessary to convert their plants to a facility where they can unload with a forklift versus an overhead crane.
That's just a great example of one way that a carrier is increasing utilization with an innovative solution. What is your utilization turnaround been like with that? I mean, how much have you improved in that lane with that specific customer?
Well, they won't give us specific figures on what we've saved them, but they've said it's been substantial. Again, interestingly enough, when people build plants, I don't know that it's interestingly enough, but they seem to do it. When they build a plant, it's really never in a very convenient place. It's usually out somewhere where it's where they've got cheap land, cheap labor, and cheap taxes. And in both of these cases, they're in places. These plants were in places where there was there was nothing to haul back out of there, and so we've been told that it could be. We've saved them maybe in as high as 20 to 25% on their costs, okay. And eliminated again all capacity issues and pricing fluctuations.
Okay, very good. I should have asked this question earlier. We were talking about delivery windows, and electronic onboard recorders have certainly impacted the ability to, I won't say fudge, but to kind of fudge the the driving window. You guys are both using EOBRs in your operations, and how has that impacted the need for more flexible delivery windows in your operations?
Well, it's not fudging whenever a driver with paper logs can drive 7 minutes and still put that as on duty, not driving. And so that's actual productivity loss that we all have experienced when we went to the electronic logs. Again, part of my scorecard for customers is if I've got a customer that will give me those flexible delivery windows, rather than everything's got to be at 8 a.m., load time, drive it 400 miles, deliver 8 a.m. the next morning, I'm going to put that customer down in C category, and I've got an A customer who's going to load me at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I can deliver later that afternoon 400 miles away. So whatever I can get out of the shipper with flexible load and unload times, that's what I'm looking for.
Brett?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to start by saying to everybody in this room that's a carrier, if you're on EOBRs, I applaud you for it. I think everybody ought to be on them. We need to even the playing field, but at the same time we even the playing field, we need to use that as a basis by which we go back to the shippers and say, you know what, everybody's on EOBRs, so we need to work together to schedule our loads accordingly so that they can work and the drivers can run legally. We have a very small percentage of people that ask to schedule their own loads. The vast majority of our customers allow us to be flexible, either allow us to be flexible or schedule our own appointments with our customers. So it goes back to an education factor, helping them to understand that these guys need to run legally, because when they run legally, they have an accident while they're going down the road, and we end up in court. And generally, if they're a good-sized shipper, they're going to be there alongside of us because they've got maybe the deeper pockets. And if we're all there working together in court, and we've got good data and show that the drivers were running legally, it allows for them to be able to come out with a, hopefully a very mitigated settlement, if we should ever have that issue. But it's just an education process.
Well, that sounds like a bit of a luxury that you have there, too, with the ability to schedule your own times. But what is that education process actually like? What are some of the steps you take with your customers to get them to see it from your vantage point?
Well, we have a tool that allows us to go out and to literally put a presentation together that shows the driver moving during his week and maybe adds in their movements from point A to point B. It's on a time grid, and it allows them to see what that driver needs in the way of off time and what their loads with, whether it be detention or their appointments, will do to our system. Now, that doesn't mean that another carrier can't come in and perfect that, but if they really want to do business with our company and appreciate the service and want to work with us, I find generally that by the time our operations people get out of a meeting with them and show them one of these graphs and show them where their lanes or problem lanes fit into that, generally we have little or no issue, and they say, you know what, we can work, we can accommodate with that.
Okay. And the last question that I have for the panel before we open it up to Q&A involves hours of service. Pharaoh touched on it yesterday, simply saying July 1, 2013. Whether or not that actually happens, I guess, is up to the court system. I think many in this room might argue that the changes to the hours of service rules were not fair. However, they wound up being sued by both sides of the equation, so perhaps they played it perfectly down the middle. But the changes are going to have a dramatic impact in the way that carriers and shippers deal with one another. I mean, we've gone from 14 hours of on-duty time, now with the 30-minute mandatory rest period that's going to take quite a bit more than 30 minutes for drivers to get off the road to a rest stop, to start their 30 minutes of rest period, then back on the road. It's probably going to reduce their on-duty time by 45 minutes to an hour, some have argued. And again, going back to, and this is again for all three of you, how do you think the changes to the hours of service rules are going to impact carrier-shipper relations, assuming July 1, 2013, and there are no court issues?
I think the court issues and the fact that there's uncertainty about whether or not it's really going to take effect when they say it is plays against us. It plays against the shippers in the education process. But we will get out to the customers as soon as we are certain that it's going to take effect on X date, that we are educating those shippers, and they understand about the loss of productivity that we're going to see because of these hours of service changes.
Gary, your thoughts?
Well, I started Schneider in 1979, and that's when we did everything on paper. And so you can kind of understand this industry's went through a lot of technology changes. It's went through a lot of regulation changes. The best-in-class carriers know how to adjust. You got better data now than you've ever had. You can understand what do you need to put in front of the customer so you can sell your argument to improve the supply chain. So I think I look at everything that's ever happened. If you just check off all the things that happened in this industry, people rise to the occasion because the best in class know how to take advantage of the change while others are sitting around complaining about the change.
Brett, from your viewpoint?
Yeah, you hit on a good point earlier about the lawsuits. There's a school of thought out there that it'll never ever get enacted because the lawsuits will keep it tied up for years. So I'm much like like Stephen. I think that once we, I hate to say it, we're not totally ignoring it. We've looked at what it would do to us. It's not huge, but it is going to have some effect. Our big thing is that we just need to keep gathering information, keep watching to see what goes on, and see if it actually takes place, and then be ready to jump to our shippers to say, okay, this is how it's going to affect us. I like the comment that Gary made also as well. We all have more technology than ever today to be able to look at our operations and know what the impact of that is pretty quickly, and we can take advantage of that. Back in the old days, as they say, you really didn't have a lot of good information to work with by which to educate your customer.
Okay, very good. I'd like to open it up now to questions. If you have any, you can either write them down and pass them to the middle of the aisle or raise your hand. We have Avery in the middle of the room with the microphone. One here in the front, Avery.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
You guys have EOB electronic logs. Do you guys use, if I can ask, which product or which line do you use in those?
We use Qualcomm.
Okay.
And we use PeopleNet.
Okay.
We've been on EOB others for about 5 years now, but Qualcomm, a bunch of engineers from Qualcomm left years ago and started PeopleNet, so there's some similarities in the product, but they're both good products.
Right, because right now we don't have them in our company, but we are looking to get those soon, and we're looking basically for the best one to use, and also to help our drivers where it's easy for them to use as well, because it is about them. It's about us too, but it's always about the driver, because that's their store they're managing down the road.
Hey, you'll find a pretty simple transition to them. Years ago, when we first started 5 years ago, people would say, well, we'll just leave and go someplace else. First year, we probably lost 5 drivers, no big deal. Within 2 years, 2 or 3 of those drivers came back because they realized that everybody else out there was going to have them, and it's something that the whole industry was going to have to get on board with. So I would encourage you to keep going down that path and just, tap them on the shoulders and say, we'll walk you through this. And I've had owner-operators. We don't have many, but got about 25 of them out of our fleet, and they came back within the first year and said, you know what, people said you couldn't make money on e-logs as an owner-operator. We're here to say that you can. So it's just a change of mindset.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with that too is, as the hours and service rules change, it becomes more complicated to keep paper logs, and everything that we've heard talking to carriers is that their drivers really have learned to appreciate the simplicity of the EOBR on a day-to-day basis, and it really just removes the room for error there on a paper log. So
yeah, another comment to that, and I'm not going to promise you this will happen, but if a DOT officer pulls up alongside of your truck going down the road and he finds out that you've got electronic logs, or even he stops your driver and finds out he's got electronic logs, we've had many instances where they'll just tell the driver, you know what, you're on EOBRs, just keep going, you know. And the other benefit that brings to you, if they're not bothering them about their logs, they're not bothering them about their equipment. But I'm not going to tell you that won't happen.
I don't know if either of the carriers on the panel are considering natural gas as an alternative to diesel, but regardless, I'd ask you to speculate on how that switch over from a diesel to natural gas might affect the relationship, specifically as it relates to fuel surcharges, and whether that would be a complication to that relationship, especially in a transition period where you're, let's say you're operating half diesel, half natural gas. And how do you think that's a complexity? Do you think you'd have resistance from the shipping community to having surcharges? When they look at the price difference, they might not take into account, for instance, obviously the additional equipment costs and all that. Again, I know, it may be an unfair question if you haven't looked at it, but just thinking about it conceptually.
Stephen,
We haven't considered the alternative fuels for our tractors. We're just now embracing going to the smaller block engines from the larger blocks to improve our fuel economy. But it's going to blow my mind when we have to start figuring out how fuel surcharge is going to work. But I foresee, there will be those trucks out there with using LNG, natural gas, but it'll be a process. We can't just go and replace 100% of the fleet overnight, and so we're going to we'll have to absorb the cost of any difference as we move into that, because there'll still be 10% LNG, 90% diesel, and until we get that fleet replaced. And I just don't see that we're going to have, they won't be dedicated, because we're irregular route carrier ourselves, so we won't have those tractors dedicated to specific shippers and their fuel surcharge.
Well, there is going to be a transition, especially as it relates to the fuel surcharge. And I think you're going to find a shipper, once they know you're on the program, that is going to read an article and says, look, there's all this significant savings and whatever. I think a carrier always has to step back and say, if I'm best in class in consumption and I'm best in class in purchasing, I invested to get there. And I'm not going to be apologetic for being best in class. So you have to have a script that describes your investment. Because if the shipper assumes it's all profit, then you're already in a difficult negotiation phase. So early on, you need to be talking to any shipper, if you're going to make that it's an investment, it's not profit. And so you should never be apologetic for being best in class in any category.
We have looked at natural gas. Matter of fact, Clean Energy has been in and talked to us this year. We're in the process of building a new facility that would allow us to put gas along in with our fuel lanes. The challenge is right now that the engine size isn't quite there. It will be probably within the year. International's coming out with an engine, I think, that's a 13-liter. I think Volvo might be coming out with one, but the challenge is that the size of engine right now is about a 9-liter. It needs to get up to a minimum of 12 to 13 to get the kind of power necessary to handle the loads that we're doing. The infrastructure has been the other problem. I think there's about 70 stations nationwide right at the present time, and there's supposed to be adding another 30 or 40 this year. We've looked at it for dedicated operations where drivers are doing more short haul, coming back same day. But for a regular route, it's a little challenging. The last piece of that is that there is about a $35,000 upcharge for the engines at this present time. The manufacturers are trying to recoup the cost of development. So it's going to take a little bit of time for people to get comfortable. And at the end of the day, you still don't know. We've got a boatload of natural gas here in the U.S. Where's price going to go long term? We don't know. So it's kind of a, we'd love to do it from a standpoint of just doing our part to get rid of foreign oil. But beyond that, we're not quite comfortable yet with the program that's out there.
And I know that Cummins will have their 12-liter in 2013, and that's really, I think, the engine size that's going to drive real true demand for natural gas in the market, because 9 simply, I mean, if you're used to operating 13 or 15-liter engines, a 9 is probably not an option, and the 15-liter that's available, you know, is quite expensive. Right. So I think once we see that plus the infrastructure build out. Now, are you looking at yours for a dedicated operation, kind of an out and back, or when you're exploring it? Or?
More out and back. We, at this point in time, I'm not saying that we would never look at it for a regular route, but the infrastructure has to get built out first. And I think that's going to happen pretty quick. It'll be interesting to see if they can sustain the amount of investment that they've got into the infrastructure before they see the return on that, because I've talked to a couple of fleets that have gone that direction. There's Saddle Creek Corporation, I think, put a bunch of them recently into a dedicated operation. Best Way in Indiana just are in the process of taking delivery on a couple hundred gas units. Now they're hauling lighter loads, but they're going to, you know, complete natural gas. So I'm excited to do it. I just, you know, we just need a little bit more information by which to operate with and to be able to go back and, again, educate our customers with.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Okay, if there's no other questions, I'd like a round of applause for our panel. Thank you very much for joining us.